In a world filled with conflict, in a universe comprised of differences, there's one thing that absolutely everything shares in common. We all exist. Including two guys named Jack and Michael, who like to chat about that very thing over a good cup of coffee. Let's pay them a visit, shall we?
Existence Brewing.
Man, I am so out of breath. I just raced in from watching the highlights of the first round of the NFL draft. Did you happen to catch the NFL draft, by the way?
You watched the NFL draft? No. Do we want to go there? I mean, with me, I don't watch the NFL at all if I can help it.
Well, I'm telling you, the NFL is the only organization that could actually have people tune in for an event that they don't actually play the sport during that event while that event is on the air. I mean, they've literally taken the entire process of teams choosing players and made it into another television scenario. So good on them, I guess. Genius, really.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if I'd have actually become the sports fan that I was when I was a kid if it weren't for my brother's influence, because he was all about sports. And I've always been more of a mentalist and kind of I wasn't the kid that was picking flowers in the garden and, putting together bouquets at age 6. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I wish I had been that kid. Actually, I probably would have been a lot better off in some ways. But I sometimes wondered if I'd gone to it, because what I liked about sports when I was a kid was I liked the logos, and I liked the uniform, the different uniform colors, and the players' names and where they were from. I liked the variety. That was the spice of it to me. I had no interest and still have no interest in the division or the competition, really. I'm not much of a warrior in that way.
You always were a mentalist. You were a little mental.
Yeah, I think I've always been more than a little mental, and it shows in that way. So grew up watching the NFL, and it was fun in the 80s, and then in the 90s, I got into my 20s in the 90s, and you have a lot going on that you start discovering. And so I didn't exactly abandon it, but I lost interest in it and then sort of circled back. I know hockey really became my thing. I still admittedly check in on the NHL now and then, but generally speaking, I'm off of all professional sports and all major college sports. It's gotten too big. It's gotten too influential. There's too much money. I know it's not every player, obviously, but the alpha male, I could go on and on about all of it. So anyway, no, I didn't watch the draft. It doesn't sound that appealing to me, but it sounds like you checked it out.
Well, they had my attention for like maybe 15 minutes. And after they did the first pick, then I was like, okay, yeah, I've seen this all before. And, what it always is typically is the analysts have an opportunity to tell you, really what their choices are going to be for the top, and they make all their predictions and who's going to go first. Everybody wants to know who's going to go first. And it actually is probably a stat somewhere. I didn't look it up, but very rarely, I think, does the person who's ever drafted first actually end up in the Hall of Fame. So, whether or not you're drafted first or second or last or whatever, it really makes no difference on what the determining factor is going to be on the field. And, again, it's a pseudo event is what it is. It's a pseudo event that the NFL puts on. But you brought up the 90s, and the 90s was a magical era for sports. Of course, the NBA was super hot with Michael Jordan. You had Major League Baseball. The Yankees were really kind of on their tear with the playoffs. And then, of course, our regional favorite, the Seattle Mariners, had a wonderful run in the 90s.
2001, actually.
The Sonics. Well, yeah, I guess it was in 2001. But then the Sonics, they also had a team in Seattle. So, yeah, no, I think it was a great time to come of age. You were already kind of in the working force at that point, weren't you? In the 90s? Yeah,
the reason I know 2001 is because I was a board op. It was my second year in radio, and I was a board op at the ESPN, the local ESPN affiliate. And so I pretty much engineered every single game that year, and the year that they tied the record for most wins in a season. And I remember one of the things that we got as an aside, I guess, or as part of the glitz or the package, if you were a Mariners affiliate, was you got press credentials. And we were over here in Wenatchee, and I was I shouldn't say that. We were a bit of a ways away from the Seattle area, but nevertheless still went to a number of games. And I remember going to my first major league game on a press pass. And, that's kind of a big moment or a big turning point, because you go as a fan and you are forced to do all the fan things, and you watch the guys. They don't have the little Chesterfields anymore, the brown Chesterfields with that little ticket sticking out of them that says press. I miss that. I think they should make all the friggin' guys in the media wear those little derby hats and have the thing that says press sticking out of them still. I think that they all deserve to be marked in such a way personally. But I remember going down to the Mariners locker room, and Frankie Rodriguez stole my wallet and pitched it around to the guys and played keep away with it, because they all knew I was the newbie, and so it was time to haze, because that's just one of those male locker room things that you do. But I remember going in there, and then I remember going on the field and hanging out in the dugout with their announcers. One of them is just the softest, coolest guy you could ever imagine. He's just awesome. And the players were all around, and you got to go in after the game and the manager's office and interview. Lou Piniella was the manager at the time. He had one cigarette burning. One of those guys had one cigarette burning in the ashtray and another one in his hand.
Wow.
So he was two chain smokers, if you could say, or double link chain smoker, as I sometimes called him. So I talked to all the guys after the game, and and I remember thinking this right away, but it took the full experience, I think, to really put it together, which was just, Jack, this is not right. This is wrong. I know it's a shock, because it's like, this is supposed to be the big moment, and I had wanted to follow sportscasting really pretty badly. I got into radio in sports, and really that was kind of like my chosen wing. But I really hit a wall with the major leagues, because in my estimation, that was my Buddha kind of moment. You know the story of the Buddha who was kept behind the castle walls when he was a rich prince and told never to stray from the castle walls lest he see the realities of the world that are around him, in larger fashion. Well, that was kind of my Buddha moment, because as I stepped into the locker room and got to wade in all of that pomp and all of that, exhalation of all of those athletes that were really, let's face it, we marvel at their ability to hit a ball. And yes, it's interesting, but we place its precedent above so many things in the world that are vastly more important. With the millions of dollars and the giant stadiums, we pumped so many resources into a game. And so it became, the light kind of went on. The fig sort of dropped from the tree into my lap, if you will. And I was just like, I can't do this. I can't follow this. I still worked sports for many years and retired from them only a few years ago in just like the high school capacity or, calling games. But I do remember that year quite well, because, like I said, that was my first full year in the business, and I had a chance to go do that. So that was the year that I opted out of what I was really wanting to do and follow. And from then on, I've had no clue what the hell I wanted to do, but that's okay, because I've found my way. So, well,
one of the things I think that you have alluded to is that you realize that sports is a business. A game is a business at that level, and a multi-million, billion-dollar business when it comes to the NFL. So I think the NFL is just genius when it comes to how they've self-marketed and I know we've gone down the Taylor Swift rabbit hole a few times, and my belief on that relationship as if it is not really a relationship at all, but more based on convenience. But I highly hold the idea that you don't just make that much money by accident after Taylor Swift starts dating one of the football players, tight ends, that is happening to be in the Super Bowl. So I don't know, be that as what it will. But
well, you'll forgive me two things. You'll forgive me for being what you'd call, again, the FBI or the CIA would refer to as a conspiracy theorist, because they made out that term. But I think when you're a conspiracy theorist, sometimes more than anything, you're pointing out the obvious. You're basically just saying, look, it's time to basically look at the elephant in the room. And to me, the elephant in the room is that I don't know how they do it. I don't know whether they wait until the last game. I don't know whether they do it during the playoffs. I don't know whether they do it during the regular season. I don't know if everybody's in on it. But to me, it's staged.
Yeah.
It's as staged as WWF, and that's every single professional league and major college league. And the reason why is because there's too much money involved for it not to be. And the stakeholders that pull those reins are used to getting their own way, to say the least. So that's why I just have no faith. And that's another way I think it's also kind of a futile exercise. It was like they just had the NCAA basketball tournament not too long ago, and they do all these play-in games now. I mean, it used to be the tournament was 64, was a mathematical equation. 64 becomes 32, becomes 16, becomes 8, becomes 4, becomes 2, becomes 1. Okay, even then, there were 63 teams that weren't going to win and had disappointed fans.
Yeah.
And the world over. And now there's like 70-something that have disappointed fans. And to me, it's a futile exercise. For me, I don't get anything out of it because I am one of those people that expects to get something out of the time that he puts into his endeavors. And watching sports, or rooting especially for a bunch of millionaires to put pucks in nets or balls in holes repeatedly or whatever the case may be, just doesn't do it for me anymore. But I don't want to take anything away from sports because I have enjoyed them throughout the course of my life, mostly at an earlier juncture. And I don't think there's anything wrong, I suppose, if you could really go with friendly competition. I do think that they are divisive, and I think that eventually they will have no place in a world that includes humans that are, dare I say, more evolved spiritually. Because let's face it, we're talking about a literal turf war. If we look at football, for example, it's, one team in blue jerseys, one team in red jerseys, and they're beating the hell out of each other for the sake of a ball and for bragging rights or supremacy, for owners who are all white and all rich, by the way. Not that the white matters, but let's face it, those of you searching for equality, it's the truth. There are no female owners. There are no black owners. If there are, they're part owners. And, so I think there's a lot of things that just wrap into it that are not right for me. And I'm the abstention in the audience. I'm just not going to participate any longer. But like I said, I do check NHL scores, and I don't want to poo-poo the whole affair because I think sports are fun. But in the biggest scheme of all, I think in the grandest scheme of all, I think we have them out of order. I think we have a lot of problems on planet Earth involving humankind. And provided that we are addressing those and that everybody's going to bed at least with an opportunity to eat food every night. Dare I say they all be, access to food and clean water and, that closer to Shangri-La than we certainly are now. Then we can start playing around with balls and bats and pucks in front of tens of thousands of people for the sake of passing our time. But I think right now we have a lot greater things on our plate that should be addressed. Now, again, this comes from somebody that may be a bit of a hypocrite because how much do you volunteer, Jack? Very little. How much do you do to help these situations? I feel like very little. I feel like I could do a lot more than I do. But I at least abstain from those things which I feel like are going to greatly waste my time and be the diametric opposition of what we really need to be focusing on. So I know it's a lot to digest, but we went from did you watch the NFL draft to a whole dissertation on why I'm dissing sports. But, I think I've had my fill for a lifetime because it's so repetitive. It's kind of, sadly, it's kind of like sex to me in a way, or anything, or food, anything that a lot of people enjoy. Because, like when I watch hockey highlights, I'm a fan of the Canadian teams by and large, by the way. Big surprise, right? I mean, the socialist that burns inside of me that everybody's always accused me of being, not that I care. But And I watched highlights not too long ago of a team that scored 7 goals against another team. And by the time we hit the 5th goal in the highlight reel, I was like, this is the same thing over and over again. I mean, the puck goes in the net, the light goes on, everybody cheers, and we do it all over again. And I just feel like I'm a creature that demands more variety at the end of the day. I feel like I've gotten bored with it as an exercise over the years too. So, there's a lot there to undress, but.
Wow. I guess the next time I'm out of breath, I shouldn't tell you what I was doing. So.
Sorry.
You brought up an interesting point too. Politics is also something that's kind of divisive, and it's pretty sad when sports have become a divisive topic. But one of the things that has been kind of brought to my attention, and this isn't a new thing, but in our region, there is talk about there being additional grizzly bears reintroduced into the population, or I should just say not additional, but just grizzly bears.
Yeah.
Brought into the ecosystem and introduced into the ecosystem. It's been over 30 years since grizzly bears have really lived in these parts, this here neck of the woods. But, it was an article that I ran across in the Seattle Times, and it was one that I thought maybe would be a good thing for us to mill over, because you did kind of touch on a few items, I think, in a previous podcast, which was, kind of this idea of how we view Mother Earth, how we view ourselves in that ecosystem, and our role in that ecosystem. And there was a clip that I actually wanted to play from a local news station that actually kind of illustrates some of the stories, and we can kind of go into that a little bit. Here we go.
They're the apex predator. They fear nothing. 200 outraged locals in Darrington tried to rally against returning grizzlies. Their town sits within the relocation zone. We're going to live right here where the bears are eventually going to be. Even the mayor was on board, arguing the ecosystem just isn't ready yet.
When we bring back the salmon, that's the time.
Hunters don't want to compete for game like elk and deer, and out east, ranchers worried for their livestock are resistant too.
Maybe never's the right time, or maybe the right time is 10 years from now. But right this minute isn't the right time for this.
But hey, like it or not, it's happening. The decision is inked.
Yeah, so, it's been in the works for quite a few years. And I want to say that it was a similar public outcry when they were trying to do the same thing with the wolf population in the Pacific Northwest. And I want to say that the wolf population at the time was a little more significant. Like they were actually in the wild, but grizzly bears aren't really in this area, due to whatever, overpopulation, overhunting, whatever it was. Yeah, they weren't found in the wild in this region. And I thought that they brought up an interesting point. I think it was the mayor of the town of Darrington in that news clip that was talking about how, it really is kind of more of an idea of not just in my own backyard. We don't want these apex predators, as they keep referring to them as. But it was also in this idea of, like, is the ecosystem really ready for bears to be introduced into an area? And it got me thinking, too, like, if something isn't found naturally in an area, whether it's a white owl or a pygmy rabbit or whatever it might be, if it's not found naturally, and I think like taking steps to try and preserve a species is one thing, but then to take a species that isn't already living in a particular area, maybe at one time was, how is it that humans have a better understanding than Mother Earth as to how to take care of these creatures? What are your thoughts, Jack?
Well, I think, first of all, it's in a way that from the stance of ecosystem management, it's tantamount to pulling down the statue of Robert E. Lee that sits somewhere and saying, I'm sorry. It's tantamount to wanting to go back and erase the N-word from all of Mark Twain's works. It's tantamount
righting a wrong.
to taking, in land that was robbed or taken away from the indigenous peoples and in some way trying to make up for that by giving them something or taking the Redskins name off the helmet or the logo off the helmet. Look, we're not growing or expanding in the right way. It's not about going back and undoing all the evils that we've already perpetrated, because let's face it, we drove these creatures to the brink of extinction. The reason why the grizzly bear is no longer doing grizzly bear things in the Pacific Northwest is because man came in and hunted them all out. Same with the wolf in most of North America. The populations I know are thriving in some places again. That's okay, but my issue, if you want to just get ground level, aside from, the bigger picture, and I'm a million miles high guy, as you know.
Yeah, I know.
So to me, we're not growing in the right way. It's not about, gosh, we killed them all off, now let's bring them back. Well, what good does that do now? Because the problem with doing that now is my issue with the wolf has always been, listen, if you can ecosystem ready for it or not, I don't know what that argument's all about. Is the ecosystem ready for you, sir? It was never ready for you. The only thing you could pull off the face of the planet and get away with not interrupting or disturbing anything is human beings. And that's a fact. Every scientist on Earth will agree with you about it, no matter what wing they represent. So my issue with the reintroduction of anything, wolves, grizzly bears, which are both predatory, so of course they're both going to draw a lot of ire from people who live around, and understandable if you're up in the woods and they just decide to, plop down something that could eat your dog or even you. Yeah. I imagine you'd probably have an issue with that, because we're not accepting the fate that we've drawn up for ourselves. We're not accepting the blueprint that we've gone ahead, the bloodied blueprint that we've decided to roll out. We're not accepting it. We're saying, well, now we're going to make it this politicalist issue, so to me, we're going the wrong way. And the issue at the base issue that I have with it, the root issue that I have with it, in trying to be as empathetic with an animal and trying to be as empathetic with the life of a wolf or the life of a grizzly bear, these creatures that were already here before we arrived and started, doing whatever we're doing, is if they could just plop them down, ecosystem ready or not, again, I don't know what that means, and just leave them alone, that would be one thing. But they meddle with them constantly. With the wolves, they're constantly chasing them around with helicopters. They're killing off members of the packs because of predation, because of complaints from the ranchers where they get their cattle, and they're tagging them. They're following them around. They're not leaving them alone. So let me ask you this. If you're a human being and we've been driven to the brink of extinction in a certain area because, the extraterrestrials have taken over, like they want us to believe, because they want their war in space, but that's another topic for another time. And they're going to reintroduce Michael and his family into the environs of the Pacific Northwest. Okay, you're going to say, all right, fine, I guess we can live up there. It's kind of the same as living anywhere else. Would you want to be left alone to do human things, to do Michael Elliott things, or do you want to be bothered constantly by these ETs that are tagging you and taking you up in their ship and doing all these things? The answer's clear. The answer's clarion. It's obvious. And also with these bears, where are they getting them from? The answer is Colorado. They're going to go to an environment that is 1,000 miles away, just
where they're thriving, maybe.
They're living happy grizzly bear lives, doing grizzly bear things in grizzly bear country, and they're going to go and shoot them up with artificial agents that are going to knock them out so that they can load them on nets and put them however they move a grizzly bear. That's a dangerous process, too. That mountain goat relocation that they've done, I've covered that actually here in Washington State before, when they were relocating the mountain goats from the Olympic Peninsula to the North Cascades. And many of those goats perished. They died, because that is an intense process for a wild animal to go through. Try being a grizzly bear, doing grizzly bear things, and suddenly, what the fuck is this? All of a sudden, I'm getting a dart in my ass, and then I'm getting transported on a helicopter, and that ain't a first-class seat, by the way. And I wake up in a strange environment. Do you think those animals are going to be stressed and ready to freaking rip somebody apart? You bet they are.
Yeah.
So I hate this. And the reason I hate it has nothing to do with the fact that it's going to be wrong for the ecosystem. It's not the right time. My ranch will be in jeopardy. My children. I can give a goddamn about those people. Quite frankly, you're the ones and your ancestors are the ones that made this happen. Not that it's your fault directly. I'm concerned about the animals themselves, and we should be, because that's where it starts. You're meddling with what was already here, and you're doing it in a way that's egregious, and it needs to stop. And also this whole thing with, well, we can go back and fix everything. Come on.
Yeah.
Give us a break. It's time to grow up and realize we've made these mistakes. Now let's figure out some honest, progressive ways to deal with them. And one of them might be to stop spending $30 billion on the NFL every year. I mean, I had this argument with my radio audience constantly whenever they would bitch about teacher salaries. Teachers are underrepresented. Teachers don't get paid enough money. And I said, well, sir, do you watch the Seattle Seahawks? Do you buy tickets? Do you buy jerseys? And yes, I'm going to pick on that institution because it's absolutely, completely irrelevant and unnecessary to a thriving society. We don't need it. And absolutely that person did. Oh, yeah, I go to a few games here and there. I got me a jersey. Yeah, you do. And you're willing to support an organization that pays its employees millions of dollars before they've proven anything of value within the realm of that, within that actual arena, within that entire, milieu. You're willing to actually pay them, who is first in the draft? What's he going to get? 10 million, 15, 20? I mean, so you're willing to do that. How many teachers would that pay? How many teachers would that pay? So you can't have both. You just can't. We can't afford to do it anymore. Not with the game that we want to play. And if we're looking at the literal game where we scratch out the X's and O's and we get rid of the zeros in this illusory monetary system that we have, and we start getting really real about it, we really can't afford to do it based on the resources that we have. We don't have the resources to continue plugging in to playing games. We all have spare time. We all want to live a better life, and that includes being more comfortable, and that includes having more time to play. We all want that, but we all have to contribute our fair share. And the first contribution is consciousness of the fact that these issues are real and how to effectively deal with them individually and then proliferating outward as a collective. So it's a huge deal. And I feel sorry for the grizzly bears, quite frankly, that they're going to go plucked from the Colorado landscape to be part of this experiment because they're going to be harassed for the rest of their lives. They're never going to have a moment's peace. They're never going to be able to settle down and repatriate to the Cascades, what we call the Cascades. I mean, it's time we left Mother Nature alone. And that's why I said several episodes of the podcast ago, I don't like people traipsing around in the backcountry. Our footprint on enough on this planet. Leave those critters and creatures that are living way, way back alone. They have an absolute right to be here, a cosmic egalitarian right to be here on this rock. They were here first. They've messed with the ecosystem. They wish us no harm. They don't want to hurt us. I mean, you ever see somebody be afraid of a bee? I'll rake my sister-in-law for this, actually. She made every single one of her children afraid, deathly afraid of bees. And I don't know if you've ever heard something called the birds and the bees before, but they're pretty important to the ecosystem. Pollinators have a place that is high on the list of why things in nature thrive. We need them. Everything needs them. So I was just aghast. I mean, to make your little children afraid of bees because of the risk that they might actually land on you and accidentally sting you. They have no interest in stinging you. The hornets at your picnic, maybe after your hot dogs, they can be aggressive, I know, but they still have a right to be here. We have to stop this vilification. We have to stop this anthropocentrizing of these animals into these human beings and give them these human qualities, which they don't have. We're supposed to take care of them, and we're not doing a good job of looking after them. So I hate the grizzly bear relocation personally, because to me, it's just another human game.
Yeah, I think we're in a total agreement there. And I think there was a question somewhere in there.
There was?
Yeah, you were going to ask me a question if I was a grizzly bear.
Are you a grizzly bear?
I don't know. Am I?
You're kind of giving me the Charles Grodin vibe, like right now.
Well, if I was a grizzly bear and you were coming down to relocate me, I would first say,
who sent you?
And then I would proceed to ask, well, why are you going to take me to this faraway place?
Maybe never's the right time.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I wouldn't do well there. Maybe it's too cold. Maybe it's too hot. Maybe there's not enough food for me. What am I going to do when I get there? How am I going to feed my family? Well, I'm going to be forced to go down to Joe's log cabin and eat a cat or go through his garbage or, whatever. Yeah, I am in total agreement. And I think that's the big question, right? Is why are the bees dying? Why are there no grizzly bears in this area? Why are they thriving in a place like Colorado so well that you guys are having a surplus of grizzly bears and you want to relocate them to a place that has no grizzly bears? You see what I'm saying, and I think we're all just circling around the same camp, which is why not start with fixing the problem and then expanding it into, is this an ecosystem that needs grizzly bears or can sustain grizzly bears for that matter?
Well, I'll tell you, you want to get really hard, language here, just to get right down to it. If you want to help the grizzly bear, if you want to do something for the wolf, first of all, stop having children. Stop making mouths to feed that need houses to live in so that there's this spread of population. That's what's destroying their environment, is the massive proliferation of human beings. We have a giant footprint on their landscape because we come in and stake our claim. Doesn't matter what color we are either in this equation. It's all the same in that game because it's a human versus everything else game. We come in and say, no, we're plowing it over, digging it up, running it under, and I'm building my house and plugging it into all this infrastructure, and that's it. That's final. End of story. And all of us want to feel like we have the right to do that. And, what I did was, not that bad, or what my neighbor did was not that bad. Sure, there are those that have solar panels on their house, or those that have a cistern for water, or, those that only do xeriscaping, so they're not using chemicals in their... I mean, I know people are trying, and I don't want to be, a complete misanthrope. I don't want to be completely misanthropic about the issue, but the bottom line is that's really the only thing that's going to stop the bleeding at this point, is we have to stop encroaching on the landscape. We've already encroached on the landscape enough. We have to back off. Or at least just say, okay, we're done for now. But I mean, China alone is like, it's not going to happen because it's an interesting, I guess the elements involved, the nucleus of this is interesting, Michael, because the reason why we do that is the same reason why the grizzly bear propagates as well, because we're also an animal. We also have instincts like an animal does. And so our instincts tend to take over and say, we need to make more of us, and we need to, there needs to be more of us, and I need to have this and have that, and I need to have all the food for my family, and I need to protect them. And, those are understandable instincts. So we can relate to our neighbors, the grizzlies, and our neighbors, the wolves, and our friends and brethren in the wild in that way, because they're all out there trying to survive. But the problem is they don't have opposable thumbs and, 1800 cc brains and a hypothalamus that can process all of these things and decide to build a house and decide to create the Industrial Revolution and make DirecTV and all the wiring and all the satellite parts that are necessary for that to happen, or electricity on the landscape, stringing up poles with the, I go on and on and on about, ask the Hopi again about the ways that we have scarred the landscape with our quest for convenience, with our quest for comfort. And the animals don't get that same luxury. And so we aren't playing fair because it's not fair. But in a game where one player is the animal and their brain is only this big and they only have big giant paws and not opposable thumbs to go with them to build things and make tools, and the other opponent does, and the other opponent also has something called, the potential at least, to have something called compunction, which is knowing when it's wrong to do something. It also possesses the ability for rationale and reason, logic. It is incumbent fully upon that entity to be the one that makes the rules and makes them properly. But we haven't done that. And there's nothing we can do about that. So again, rather than trying to go back and revise all these things that we feel like we've done wrong, don't you feel like there's something we could do? Here's the thing. Instead of reintroducing, instead of pulling grizzly bears from point A and putting them on point B where we wiped them out 40 years ago, why don't we go back to point A where they already are and draw a bigger line than we ever have around their territory and say, you're not building anything, period. And it's for the bears. That would do them a hell of a lot more good than it would to go pick a dozen of them off the landscape and then go plop them in an area where the same thing is going to happen to their habitat that's already happening to that habitat. So we have to get real, Michael. We're not being real with ourselves. We're not being honest with ourselves. You know, we're kind of, well, we want to do something, but we can't, possibly have it affect this. We can't have it affect the economy. We can't have it affect my bottom line. We can't have it affect the corporations because they run the planet, whatever the case may be. And it's not a cake and eat it too equation. This experience is too heavy. Yeah. Corporeal reality is too heavy. We can't make a cake and consume it and expect there to be cake. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and I also think that we give ourselves too much credit. I think we try to say that we're humans and we can solve any problem, and we'll solve it by putting this here and that there, and everything will be neat and tidy. And I think that's probably part of the problem that I have with this program is that there's not even really a clear causation of the endangered species, the reason the species went extinct to begin with, other than just saying, well, humans are bad. And I mean, I think there's deeper factors than just that even. And you're right. Like, hey, let's allow things to thrive where they're going to thrive. And I think in a nutshell, we also have a tendency to create bogus programs and try and, put people to work that, would otherwise maybe be doing something else and maybe more productive than relocating grizzly bears. And really just kind of fighting an uphill battle with something that is probably not going to be, one, achievable, and two, like, you're right. Why would we want to just like spread this area of where grizzly bears are? Why not try to grow it from where it can flourish and they can prosper, and everybody wins. The grizzly bear wins. And yeah, so. Well,
the real problem that we're not facing, Michael, I'll say it and say it and say it. There's too many of us, and we've got too big of a footprint on the landscape. And the consequence of that is no more wolves, no more grizzly bears. You can't have it both ways. You can't have agricultural infrastructure, especially ranching, next to areas where wolves are going to be able to find it, because wolves are going to do what wolves do. They predate. They will kill calves and cows because that's what they eat.
Yeah.
It's like pulling you off the landscape from somewhere and plopping you down next to fast food alley, next to Kentucky Fried Chicken, next to Chick-fil-A, next to that frickin' In-N-Out burger that I'm so frickin' sick of hearing about because it's just another goddamn hamburger. Who gives a shit? I mean, I'm sorry. It's the same as putting you down in the wilderness with nothing to eat, with no food, with no clothing, with no, nothing. You're on your own. You're naked and afraid. And you find Fast Food Alley, and the admission is free. They'll make you anything you want. You just have to go inside and pilfer it. And then if you do it, you're dead. The second you do it, they're going to come kill you because the ranchers are going to bitch. And because of the system that we have, they have every right to bitch because they rely on that to feed their families. So something about that is imbalanced. And what's imbalanced about it is the lie that we can have it both ways. We can't. We have to accept the consequences of what we've done. And that is we've chased the wolf off the landscape. It's gone. So when is it going to be ready? When we're shrinking our footprint on the landscape. But we know that's not going to happen. That's never going to happen, right? So we just have to accept the fact that we are extinctors, I guess, it's not a word, but, we drive things to extinction.
Well,
No question, if we had not shown up in the North American continent 500-600 years ago, whenever it was now, because the natives lived with them just fine. Now, granted, there weren't nearly as many of them. And granted, the wolf was not necessarily, the wolf was revered probably by just about every Native American tribe, but it was also probably very greatly respected because it could take you down in a heartbeat. It could end your corporeal existence. Your, life functions could cease if it got a hold of you. But, they found a way to live in connection with these animals.
Well, there wasn't as many Native Americans as there are.
There was not. Like I'm saying, there was not. But imagine if there were.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Imagine if there were, what would that look like? Is it possible to have a world with 8 billion people and still have all the wolves and grizzly bears and fish in the sea? Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But the way we do business, no way.
Well,
no way.
I think we're also discounting this idea that not every species can be equally distributed across the land. And I think that's kind of maybe a misstep on our behalf as well, to where it's who's not to say that grizzly bears, there's a reason why they're not here, right? They're like we said before, maybe it's too cold. Maybe the terrain's not proper. I think we could go on and on and on and on around this area or this issue. But again, it's we just want to meddle. We just want to make this our little greenhouse and, water the plants here and plant them there and weed it out there. And, we just have a tendency, I think, to over meddle is a good word. And, only on this podcast would we be able to draw correlations to the pay of teachers and the eradication of an endangered species.
Well, it's all ties together somehow. Even
how are they connected?
Even the most dichotomous of subjects are in some ways connected. So yeah, it's sad because I sure love the creatures.
On tonight's show, we will be talking to a former high school teacher about how she destroyed one of her students. Next on the program.
And later, Linda Moulton Howe. Don't forget Linda Moulton. She was on literally every episode of
The Psychic.
That program. No, she's a great reporter and researcher. She's really primarily a reporter. Speaking of Colorado, she was working in Colorado when she got started in reporting on subjects that were, shall we say, on the fringe of what you see in the newspaper, all of those, all those things that they went in and took down the Ghostbusters for, parapsychology and parascience and pseudoscience and all those things. She got into that because she was working, I believe she was working in Denver, may have been at the Post. I don't remember. Sorry, Linda, if you're listening, but it was the cattle mutilation phenomenon that caught her attention. And she started investigating that, and her focus dramatically shifted from whatever she was writing about, things probably I write about now in my job, local politicians, elections, races, human stuff, the city council meetings, what's going to happen to downtown Main Street when they take all the stoplights out and replace them with this, or, all that stuff. And it got focused on, whoa, there's something really big happening here. And it's one of those things that's kind of just a lot of that. I feel like they, and yes, there is a they. I know everybody who say, oh, he's a they, or, conspiracy theories. Well, let's admit it. There is a they, and they could be many different factions. It's probably more of a gestalt than anything. It's probably less big than we think it is. But
here's
whoever
question.
They are, they've done a great job of sweeping all that under the rug because you just don't hear about it as much anymore. It's like crop circles. I was thinking about crop circles today. Do you even see anything about crop circles anymore? Because we know the story about 2 guys making them all over the world is absolute bullshit. That's ridiculous. So they've encouraged, from what I understand, and this is no surprise, the farmers are to plow them over within 24 hours of finding them. If they do discover them, they're not to tell anybody about them. They're not to let anybody on their land to photograph them, to research them. They want this to go away. And the coolest thing is it seems like we were just starting to get to what crop circles really were, which was not so much aliens. It was everybody's answer in the 90s. Well, it's aliens. Everything was aliens in the 90s. What was discovered, and seems like the most plausible explanation scientifically from the few people that actually were allowed to go forward to do research on this, from what I've read anyway, if I can even trust that, was that it's the Earth. It's Gaia who's sending up these balls of energy that carve these patterns to communicate with us, to say, hey, what we were just talking about, time out here, folks. I got a problem. You're all over my backside and I love you. I mean, that's the thing. You're all over my backside, traipsing around every day doing God knows what, and I love each and every one of you and cherish the fact that I'm able to have you here sharing this with me. But you've got to wake up and do things differently. You've got to start treating me and the world that you live in and each other better. And that's what the messages were about. And of course, no, we can't have that because that's bad for the military-industrial complex, number one, and that's enough to shut everything down and get it censured. So, I don't know. But Linda Moulton Howe was on every episode of, literally, I swear, every time Art would talk, he was just like, Linda Moulton Howe, later with us. And it was almost like a fill-in guest. If the other guy didn't show up or got abducted himself, it would be Linda Moulton Howe.
In the rapture. Oh, he was sucked up in the rapture. Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you. What was the correlation to cow mutilations and immediately the aliens? What evidence was brought forth that it had anything to do with extraterrestrials?
Well, the reason why is because of the technologies involved to do what the mutilations were all about. I mean, I see. Because the mutilations were not predation. That was well understood. I mean, even debunkers couldn't argue with the fact that when a wolf or a coyote or anything, or a big cat, a cougar, when anything goes after an animal, a farm animal, and most of them were cows. They were, I guess beef cows, or some of them dairy cows perhaps, right. But most of them were cows. That seemed like be the cases. There are some sheep and goats I've seen too, but chupacabra gets those. So, you can only take so many. But most of the incidents involve bovine animals, and the way that the entrails and the rectums and the eyeballs and, the other parts of the body were removed was clean, and there was no blood. There was no trail of blood. It was like the animals had been exsanguinated in most cases. They didn't have any blood left in them. So it was not a predator, and there were many wildlife agents that signed off on that over the years, or many investigators of the scientific variety. And these are guys named like Mo, these are guys named like Harlan, who, they don't spend a damn day in their life thinking about extraterrestrials. I got hemorrhoids. The last thing I need is to be thinking about ET going up there and causing any more problems, so they're not thinking about that stuff. These guys are in the business of moving cattle back and forth. They're in the business of, beef. They're in the beef business. They're ranchers. They're cowboys, for God's sake, in so many ways. So they're not thinking about extraterrestrials. They don't care about that. So they'd research it and say, there's no way in hell an animal come out of the woods and snatch a cow, do this. So it was the technologies involved in doing the damage to the animals that killed them, and then sort of pilfering the parts, if you will, removing the parts of the animal. And So immediately, again, during the 90s, when the phenomenon really broke and surfaced, although it's older than that by several decades, it was, of course, is aliens, because aliens did everything in the 90s that we could explain.
Yeah, it was the catch-all.
But again, the best evidence that's been collected suggests that it's not aliens. It suggests that it is some form of a project that goes on at some level of the government or some quasi-government or this secret, it's that secret bullshit again. But that technologies do exist. The theory that I heard that I loved the most, because it made the most sense, and again, this is what you have to look for, to me, is you look for the thing that what makes the most sense. And what made the most sense is, you probably know this, Michael, bovine DNA is probably the closest on the planet in another animal to human DNA. Strangely enough, bovines share a very significant correlation genetically to humans. I know that's hard for a lot of people to believe, although there are, we've seen those people that look like cows. They wear muumuus, I guess, but sorry, bad joke. But with that in mind, the thought is that we, with there being 8 billion of us now, are under siege by viruses and bacteria and germs and all kinds of things that could easily wipe us out en masse. And that's bad for business, because we're a consumer-driven society. So they need us alive to keep going to the mall and to keep paying taxes for our civilization to continue. So for lack of any other reason to care, they're studying these without telling the immediate public that we're doing this, because they're trying to find basically antigens or antibodies or elixirs or panaceas, call them what you want, for diseases that are on the rise and might wipe us out. And so, of course, rather than testing on humans, which they love to do too, by the way, in certain circumstances, they've decided to do this covert project to test on animals. And I think that makes sense. I mean, I liked that explanation, that theory about that phenomenon the best, but you don't hear about it anymore because it's been totally pushed aside. So have chemtrails, for that matter. I mean, you can't even look it up. Look up stuff like this on Google, and I guarantee your first 50 are going to be about how, first of all, it's just not true. It's a myth. It's a conspiracy theory. It's something that people spin for a larf. It's not true. You're going to get all these official narratives, and you'll have to wade through all that before you get to one sliver of an alternate explanation. And that's what I think is the most interesting to explore, rather than just dismissing it, because the ranchers lose animals. The ranchers are not, they're out several animals. Imagine that, waking up in the morning and here's Bessie and Bossy and Bo lying in the field, and they have no eyeballs and no anuses, and they've been cut open and their entrails have been removed, but there's no blood. I mean, yeah, it's interesting, but your first order is, hey, I've lost 3 animals here. I mean, this is thousands of dollars, right?
Right.
Well, that's just unacknowledged, as Stephen Greer would say, probably it's the title of one of his movies. I mean, it's just literally it's just, we don't know what it is. We're not looking into it. There's no official reason. We're done.
Well, and I love the terminology that they use. They've designated the bears as a non-essential experimental population. If that doesn't sound any more like maybe COVID.
Oh.
Excuse me, bears, but you are a non-essential
and
experimental population. So we can't be blamed if you die.
It's hard enough to be labeled one of those two things by the government, knowing how wonderfully empathetic they are towards the plight of human existence, or any existence for that matter. But which would you prefer to be labeled, Michael?
I would probably say experimental.
Yeah, it'd be a hell of a ride, wouldn't it? You'd probably get a lot more interesting things happen to you.
Because experimental has more promise for the future, I think, than non-essential.
Exactly,
yeah.
Yeah, non-essential basically means we've already decided you're done one way or the other. But experimental means there's a chance. So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah, we don't need you. Okay, so what have you been up to, by the way?
Oh, well, me. I'm always downloading things, as you well know, as I like to call them, because it makes it sound so much more interesting than just thinking about stuff. Yeah, I'm an avid downloader, and it's not me. That's the thing. It's like you can't control these things if you're me. You just are sitting around, and it's almost like Buddha with a hole in his head. It's just like, and then all of a sudden you were about to be downloaded. It's like, damn, okay, here we go. And
the
so
human
you're just
mind, and it must be stopped.
Do you know about stuff like that? You ever heard about those things, those packets that they say, packets of information like they send through computer systems? And that's basically, some philosophers have suggested that's exactly how it works, our connection to whatever this machine is that's, seemingly bigger than us, but again, that we're an inextricable part of, that can't exist without us, nay, us with them. And it gives you these packets, and you unload these little pieces of information. So almost look like it, like that, like you're opening like a little sugar packet of information. And some of them are sugary and floury, and some of them are a little more salty, I suppose. This one was more salty, I guess, but I think it was just one of those random Jack Hansen thoughts that wasn't really a download so much. It was just one of those things that I play around with in my own crazy little gray matter. But I was thinking about crosses the other day, and the way crosses came up is I was talking to somebody that I work with, and he had said something, and we had an exchange. He said something that was sort of a little bit cynically finalistic, I guess. He was just like, he put a capper on it by saying something cynical. And then I sort of put an additional cherry right next to it by saying, well, we all have our cross to bear. And then I got to thinking about it, and I put an ellipse on it, like the ... And then 3 or 4 seconds later, I turned to him and said, and mine's upside down. Yeah. Not that I'm a practicing devil worshiper or anything. I mean, it's just, but it was a funny thing. It was like, I got to remember that, we all have our cross. We all have a cross to bear, but unfortunately mine's upside down. And it's like the brownies came and turned it upside down. I didn't do it. Somebody got a hold of my cross and turned it upside down. It's like Rodney over here. Hey, he was throwing my cross upside down. You know what I'm talking about?
It sounds like maybe a dropped packet, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm not sure if this was a good, giant packet from the Big U or not. Have we talked about the Big U? We got to talk about the Big U. Ooh. Anyway, long story short, the Big U, that's what I call the universe, because we're chumly like that, the universe and I. So it's the Big U, and I'm just Jack, for sure.
I hear some music. Something about the wolf will survive?
Oh, yeah. These are my buddies, Fortune. There's several bands called Fortune, but this is the one from Massachusetts in the 90s. Great progressive metal. Got to hear this, Michael. You'll love it.
Well, Jack, I'm going to send you off until we meet again.
All right, until we download again.
Got to grab my falconry gloves.
You and that falconry. You be careful.
I can see you come apart, living like you do. You're trying too hard.
Well, it looks like Jack and Michael have finished up their latest chat about all things existence. But if anything they said got your own existence brewing, be sure and catch their other talks at existencebrewing.com and drop them an email to share your thoughts using contact@existencebrewing.com.
Existence Brewing.